Boundaries. This topic speaks to my heart and soul, and I am so excited to have Krista Resnick with me today. She's a master coach, a boundaries expert. We're going to dive deep into this topic. Maybe you've put some boundaries up right now and you're like, I'm not going to join this because I don't have the time. I got other things to do. And that's totally okay. You can catch the replay and learn how to set boundaries for yourself. So, Krista, thank you so much for joining me. I'm super excited for this conversation.
I'm honored, Laura. Anytime I have an opportunity to speak about boundaries, it is a true gift. Thank you.
My pleasure. And if you're joining us and want to say hi, pop in. If you've got questions, put them in the comments, whatever platform you're on. We will see them, we'll share them, and Krista will definitely answer. So, okay, boundaries. I feel like this has been a topic of conversation for, I don't know, years.
Yep.
And it's a concept that people understand, I think, theoretically, but a lot of people struggle with. So, how do you define boundaries? And then I would love to know, like, do you have tips? What are your best practices for finding what the boundaries are that you need to set?
I love that question so much. So one of my actual favorite questions is, what are boundaries? How do you define them? And I am someone who has a firm belief that there's actually not a wrong definition. You get to work and lean into your boundaries the way that suits you best. However, what I know to be true for my own personal journey is that, there was a point in time, Laura, where I sort of bought into the mindset of, well, this is what I'm tolerating and this is what I'm not tolerating, because there was a coach in my life that was kind of coaching me in that direction. And so then I started to really put my foot down because I had been very boundaryless and I was very resentful in a lot of my relationships. I was exhausted. I was overwhelmed. I just wasn't happy. I didn't feel that feeling of fulfillment and satiation, and as if I was living my life on purpose. So then I flipped the script and then we went to being very boundaried. But what I didn't understand was that I was setting my boundaries from a place of fear. I was very rigid in my boundaries. And one day, it probably wasn't one day, but it was, culmination of days.
Yeah.
I woke up sort of scratching my head going, I'm really boundaried, but I'm kind of disconnected, isolated, and alone. I'm sort of lonely here. What's going on? Right? Because I still, Laura, hadn't really dealt with what was going on beneath the surface. I had put a Band-Aid on a bullet hole from a lot of my unhealed wounds, my unhealed traumas, my untrue thoughts, my unmet needs, however you want to frame that up. And so I was setting these boundaries from this place of fear. So how I really like to play with boundaries is I like to talk about them in the framework of they're felt in the body, right? We can feel our boundaries. And I'll give an actual real-time example in just a moment here. But they're really about, first of all, getting feedback from what's happening in our body, because our body is very, very wise. However, most of us have learned to live from this right here. And so we're disconnected from the chin down. And so we're not getting that beautiful wisdom and feedback of the body. Boundaries are about being honest. It's one of the reasons I love them so much. They're honest. They're saying, this is who I am. This is what I need. This is what I stand for. This is what matters to me. This is my capacity at this season of my life. So those are the definitions that I love to play with that really help put me into this healthy framework and really allow me to play with more fluid boundaries, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I love something you just said about the season of your life. And to me, that's acknowledging that it's not a set it and forget it. You can build boundaries today that won't work for you a few years from now.
Bingo.
And that your boundaries aren't like not set in stone. That sounds like an oxymoron, but that you have to have that fluidity and realize that just because it was a boundary before, it doesn't mean it will be forever.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So as I was building my business, I had to be really firm with my boundaries. And the reason why I needed to be really firm with my boundaries, which looked like, before I became an entrepreneur, I stayed at home with my 3 boys. And so then I moved from stay-at-home mom into being an entrepreneur, and everybody still thought I was available for coffee. Well, can't go for coffee? Like, we always used to go for coffee. What's that? You're just not available to go to lunch? Like, what? And I really had to get clear and concise and firm with my boundaries for a little while. Not so much, not at all because of the other person, but because that people-pleasing pattern was so ingrained in me from my childhood. I was raised in a home where I wasn't free to be me. It wasn't okay to be me. And so what I learned was put the mask on of appeasing and pleasing everybody else around you. It literally was how I felt loved, seen, validated, and as if I mattered. So I still fought that a lot. And it was very, very, very uncomfortable for me to have to go to a coffee and give an end cap of, okay, I've got 1 hour, let's go. Right. So I just didn't go at all. That's why I was so rigid for a while. Now I can be loosey-goosey and say, hey, I'd love to go for a walk. I'd love to go for coffee. And I need to be done at noon, please. Thank you. But I didn't have the strength and the resilience back then that I do now.
And I think I feel like it's more of a woman problem. Correct me if I'm wrong, because we are taught to be people pleasers. I think a lot of times we're raised to be that way and to make everybody happy, to be the good girl, to do all of these things. And it's usually to your own detriment. And that's how we become boundaryless as we get older. But we do struggle with like, what is the boundary in my personal life? What's a business boundary? How can I say no? Will they not like me? So there's a lot of kind of undercurrent, I believe, that comes up in boundaries that can cross over from work and business.
Oh, how we do anything is how we do everything. Totally.
Yeah. Totally. So what would you say are like, how do you get started? How do you figure out what are the boundaries you need to set up for yourself? Or is there some guidance you could give people on, if you're like, I don't have any boundaries, or I need to set up boundaries, or what's the first thing people need to do?
Yeah, I love that question. And where I love to start is, let's first examine, what do you actually believe about boundaries? Let's start there. Were you taught? Do you believe? Is there something ingrained in you that believes boundaries are selfish? They're cruel. They're mean. For some people that maybe were raised in a very extreme sort of religious type home, maybe they were even sinful, like, right? Like, we can't be setting boundaries. That's sinful. So we really want to look at, what do you actually believe to be true about boundaries? And just play with that a little bit. Do some journaling, put it out on paper, actually give yourself permission to see on paper what you believe to be true about boundaries. What were boundaries? How are they modeled for you in your home? Take a peek at that. Start looking at some of the childhood conditioning, some of the belief systems that you have around boundaries. I think it's really important. I'm a very, very honest coach. I lead with honesty because it's in integrity for me.
Yeah.
And I feel I have a responsibility to share with people that it is uncomfortable. Boundaries are uncomfortable. There are still boundaries for me that are uncomfortable. We've got to learn to sit in the discomfort. Several weeks ago, I mentioned a few moments ago, I'd love to share a personal story.
Yes, please.
It might really land for the listeners to drive this point home. Several months ago, we were at a social gathering, and there was a gentleman that I knew that came up to me and wanted to share a joke with me. It was something he had on his phone. So I'm like, cool, shoot, show me the joke. So he did. And I happened to find it deeply offensive. And I know that we live in a culture where everything can be, offensive. But this was a joke that was very much grounded in oppression. And I was not a fan of this joke. And in that moment, it was like there was a little Krista sitting on my shoulder, and I could watch what was happening. And it was if I saw a fork in the road. And on one, side of the road, I could step back into my people pleasing. I could step back into my acquiescing, subordinating. We got to go along to get along here. We got to laugh. We got to giggle. Hey, isn't that a funny joke? Because what's he going to think if I don't laugh and go along, right? What's he going to tell other people out in the community that I live in? Well, she's a real drag. She's a real, buzzkill. So am I going to go down that road? Or am I going to go down the road of integrity? Am I going to go down the road of self-honoring? And even though in this moment, my body temperature feels like somebody cranked it up to 500 degrees. Yeah. I have a lump in my throat. My ears are hot. My face, my cheeks are flush. Am I still going to stay true to myself? Now, nobody needed to know about that boundary. I could have just giggled, laughed, life goes on, right? But when my head hit the pillow that night and when I woke up the next morning, I would have known that I was out of integrity with me. And at some point, Laura, that has to matter. Our relationship with ourselves has to matter. It has to be the top priority.
Absolutely.
So I guess that was a long way of saying, they're going to be uncomfortable. That just happened probably 6 months ago, let's say, right? 4 months ago, maybe something of that nature. That wasn't that long ago. I have been deep in this work for at least 6 years. That moment was still discomforting to me, but I had a responsibility to myself. So I don't want people to think that at some point it's just going to be smooth sailing, because it's probably not. But the more we do it, the more we're building a beautiful nervous system to really be able to stand in our truth and say, no, I am standing in my dignity. I'm setting my boundary with myself that I don't appreciate those kind of jokes or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yes. I think, when I talk about stories all the time, and stories are what helps people connect with content, right? So, maybe they won't remember everything you said, but they'll remember that, like, that story. And I think that's so important that we learn from these things. And it brought up story. I was like, oh yeah, that reminds me of a different scenario, but what are some boundaries that I've been working on or have come up against? And recently I've been asked to speak at 2 different events, and they had like a tiny, tiny budget. And I knew that the audience was not my audience. I knew they were not going to become clients. And I have said no, unless they can increase the budget. It doesn't matter if you're a for-profit, not-for-profit. I cannot give you my time and energy for nothing. And I deserve to get paid for it. Mm-hmm. And it's not, it's not a valuable use of my time. And it is okay for me to say that.
Oh, and it's good. Even more than okay. It's beautiful. It's beautiful to be able to stand in your truth, isn't it? And just say, you know what? I have these needs over here, and this doesn't fit my needs, which is actually my 4th point. My 3rd point from that story would be pay attention to the feedback in your body, right? So know that boundaries aren't always going to be comfortable. Let's just claim that and own that, right? So that we're not setting ourselves up for when's it going to be comfortable and creating more shame and dysregulation in our system. Yeah. Pay attention to the feedback in your body. And to your point, I have my own podcast, and I get approached quite often. And I really do use the feedback of my body. I've had a couple of folks recently who look great on paper. Something in my body said, no, they are not the right fit for your audience. And I went with my body. 6 years ago, I could have never done that. I could have never done that. I could have never leaned into the wisdom of the body. I could have never spoken my truth and said, no. I would have totally said, sure, you can come on the show. Of course. Right? Because it was all about being others focused and how are they going to feel if I say no? So really listen. Fourth point is we've got to get clarity around what it is we actually need. Like, what do you need? What are your needs in this situation? Is it connection? Is it belonging? Do you have a longing or a deep need for play, for peace, for order, for independence, for autonomy? Whatever it is, what are your actual needs? Because it's really hard to set a boundary around like nothing. Needs are sort of the foundation. And I'm doing this because it's almost like, here in the Midwest, we build foundations when we're building a house down into the ground, right? So it's sort of like needs are your foundation of your home. And then we build the walls, and the walls are the boundaries that we put around the needs. But we've got to have the foundation laid first, which is what are you actually needing in this situation?
Yeah. What's valuable to you? What's meaningful? How do you want to spend your time? Who do you want to spend your time with? There's so many different things. And you're right. You can't build the boundaries until you get really clear on what those needs and wants are.
Yeah. And a lot of people, especially, what you shared earlier about females especially don't know, because we've been so trained to think about caretaking and being others focused that I have women say to me all the time, somebody just said it to me last week, do I have a right to have needs? Like how many needs are too many? And I don't even know really actually what I need. What are the actual needs here? Is it to be heard? Is it to be seen? Is it to be appreciated? What's the actual need? We've got to get clarity around that.
Something that I did last year, I think it was last year, was an exercise that I couldn't determine what was a should and what was a desire. And that was trippy, because I was like, am I writing this in the desire category because I feel like I should desire this?
Yeah.
Or that's what women or mothers or whatever should want or desire in their lives? Or is it really something I deeply desire? And I spent a lot of time creating like, what is it I feel like I should do?
Yeah.
And what do I deeply, deeply desire in my life? And then it becomes so much easier to build boundaries, because I understand this is how I want to live my life. Does this whatever align with it?
Yes. Bingo. Spot on. Yes.
And you know that I'm doing this interview from my bedroom in an Airbnb in Italy, as I've just moved my family abroad for a year, just shy of a year, and my family's in the next room. And I was like, where am I going to do this? I literally dragged a desk from the kids' room into my bedroom so I can set this up. It's like I'm figuring it out. However, I had some really clear intentions around what I wanted, how I wanted to work in the next 10 months while we're here. One of them is I'm not doing calls with, I am really, really streamlining who I will have a call with.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm not getting on a call with somebody who's like, oh, I don't actually have the budget to work with you. That's not happening.
Yep.
Like, if you don't have the budget to work with me, you can follow me on social. You can join the free thing that I offer, download my free things. If you are legitimately serious about working with me, then and only then can we book a call, because you have some logistical questions about whatever, or you just want to connect. I know I want to work 4 hours a day, and I'm going to be really strategic about how I'm spending that time. That requires boundaries. That requires a team that takes care of stuff for me.
Yeah.
And I trust and I know that is happening, so that when I'm working on the things that only I can do in my business.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So
that requires boundaries.
it requires boundaries. And what you're basically telling me, what I'm hearing, now correct me if I'm wrong, that does happen once in a while. Point number 5, when you're asking for tips and recommendations, you've done your work. You know who you are. You own your truth. You own your worth. So boundaries are actually, everybody wants to, how do we set boundaries? How do we say no? Boundaries are actually self-discovery work. They're self-worth work, because I'm hearing very clearly from you. You don't like it? Great. Great. Move on. There's other opportunities and resources, but I know who I am. I know the value of my time. I know the value of my services. This is what I want. This is what I desire. These are the boundaries that I'm committed to make that happen. Bing, boom.
And it allows me to have the life and the business that I desire. This morning, I was working on grade 10 business class with my 15-year-old. It's fascinating. We had a whole conversation about business ethics. Spent the afternoon at the beach with my son, my youngest son, swimming and having a whole conversation around health and sexuality, which was like an amazing conversation. And then was just at a masterclass, doing a live interview with you. I've got the another call in a little bit too. And I'm like, I'm doing all the things that I want to do. With the people I want to do them with. It's not perfect.
Yeah.
It's been rocky being over here. Like, it has not been easy. However, I'm creating a life that fits within the journey and the parameters that I'm looking for. And I'm holding myself, and I'm asking my team and my clients to also, help hold me accountable to those things.
Yes. Yes. And so it's not, for those people listening that really do struggle with boundaries, based on what you just said, it's really flipping the paradigm, which is what we talked about with point number 1. What do you believe to be true about boundaries? So often when we think about just no, 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 telling people no, that can create, especially when we're new to this boundary work, a lot of dysregulation, a lot of activation in our nervous system if we are so deeply conditioned to people pleasing and acquiescing. So what I would invite people to think about is, what are you saying yes to? So that beautiful opportunity that happened between you and your son, you were saying yes to something that deeply, deeply matters to you. You were saying yes to connection with him. You were saying yes to this call with me because boundaries are something that matters to you, that you want to share with your followers and your listeners. You weren't just acquiescing and appeasing me to have me on. It was really about, no, this actually really is a topic that matters. So flip the script. It can be so helpful to flip the script from what am I saying no to what am I actually saying yes to? I can really help sort of ground and regulate yourself a little bit and kind of ease all of that, the nerves and the fear that can come up. Because when the nerves and the fear come up, oftentimes people then will acquiesce and go into their old coping strategies, which look like people pleasing.
Yeah, I think if you can look at it like, what's a hell yes? Like, what is yes? It makes it easier for you to kind of reverse engineer what the no's are.
Yeah. Full body yes. Mm-hmm.
Love that. So you'll love this. I think you'll love this. We created a YouTube channel for people to follow our journey while we're abroad for the year. And it's called The Answer is Yes. And I'm like, that feels counter to like the whole boundary. I'm like, but you can also say no, but to me, it's about saying yes to the right things. It's about saying yes to adventure. It's about saying, this is wildly uncomfortable, what we're doing.
Yeah.
Wildly. And we said yes for the adventure, for the connection, for the challenges, for all of it.
Yeah.
Right. And so sometimes it is about saying yes, the full body yes, because that gets you closer to figuring out what you really want to say no to.
Mm-hmm. So you just listed some really beautiful needs. We said yes to the connection. We said yes to the adventure. You are honoring those values, those needs that were probably stirring in your heart long before you actually ever literally said yes.
Yeah. Absolutely. I was in Greenland a year ago, right now, actually, on a trip with a group of entrepreneurs. And that really got a lot of this started, this thoughts around shoulds and desires. And I have 8 words that are my true desires in my life. And those are the things that I frame everything that I do, whether it's with clients, with my family, for myself personally. And it's amazing just having these words and going into each day intentionally thinking about, how do I want to show up today? And it's not about what am I saying no to? It's about what is important, what is valuable to me, and everything else falls away.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's a beautiful thing.
It's a beautiful thing, and it's nothing to apologize for, which is, again, most people that struggle with boundaries think that they have to apologize for their boundaries. But knowing who you are, what you were created and brought into this world for, who you were meant to be, living in the truth of that is something to have your head hit the pillow at night and just be really, really proud of.
Yeah, amazing. Okay. Can you just run through those 5 things again, just as we kind of wrap things up? Just remind us again, what are the five things?
I can try.
Okay.
We'll throw in some extras. I don't know if I
Yeah.
can't. Them. So number 1 is really examine, what do you believe to be true about boundaries? Really important that you uncover that. Number 2, boundaries will be uncomfortable to your system, but it's sitting in that discomfort is what actually makes it easier and builds a well-resourced nervous system to keep doing it and to keep expressing yourself and standing in your truth. Number 3, I believe, was owning and knowing. So we've got to know our needs, and then we've got to actually be able to own our needs and say, I long for this. I really long for that sense of adventure. I really desire to have that feeling of connection. And then allow the ideas and the strategies. So for you, the strategy was actually Italy. Like, you could have gotten connection a lot of different ways, but for you in particular, it required that you went to Italy to bring in that sense of connection to your life. So owning and knowing your needs. And then number 5 would be, what are you actually saying yes to flip that paradigm from no, 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 because that can feel so rigid and harsh, right? It can. So let's flip it. What are you saying yes to? What are you aligning to?
Love it. Love it so much. Thank you so much, Krista. I've loved this conversation. And we've never met before. So this was super fun to just kind of like dive right in. I feel like we've known each other for a long time. Yeah. So I really appreciate that. So how can people connect with you? How can they work with you? What's the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, I would just say head straight to my email, KristaResnick.com. I do have a free workshop happening next week, starting September, I think it's 19th. Is that next week? Yes. And it's called Free to Be, to just be who you are, to be in your truth, to be in your fullest expression. And so that's going to be 5 days. We're going to go about 20 minutes each day, Monday through Thursday. And then Friday, we're going to end the week with a beautiful 75-minute webinar, really talking about people pleasing, actually the fawning pattern. So there's fight, flight, freeze, and then the 4th pattern is fawn. So we're going to dive deep into the fawning pattern, but people are welcome to join that. There's no cost. It's going to be a really, really extraordinary week.
Amazing. Yeah, I will definitely check that out myself as well and would love to join.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you again so much for your time. If anybody's got questions, you're watching the replay, head on over. I popped the link into the comments so you can find Krista at her website. Join that free training next week and start thinking about, what do you want to say yes to? And how can you start to build that foundation so you can build your boundaries? Amazing. Thanks again, Krista. And thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thanks, Laura.